Payman, King Payman. Maybe be careful how often you say his name. Payman was not a work of complete fiction for A24's horror hit Hereditary. Far from it, in fact. Rather than conjure up an esoteric menace of his own design, writer and director Ari Aster took some inspiration from classic grimoires out there, such as the Lesser Key of Solomon, and brought a demonic spirit of old, you know, if you believe in that kind of thing, into the middle of his feature-length debut. Sitting atop a camel, sporting a crown, Payman wanders about, while musicians rudely blare out a whole lot of background noise with cymbals, trumpets, and goodness knows what else, to celebrate him everywhere he goes. He'd be an awful neighbour. For conjurers of old, like most famously, or perhaps that's most infamously, King Solomon of Israel, Payman was a potentially useful tool, providing knowledge of the world, past, present, and future, to those who could supposedly invoke his presence. In Hereditary, Payman is unseen but ever present, sort of like Maris in Frasier, or President Hughes in Veep. An essential cog in the narrative that is never truly revealed to the viewer. But all that actually is not clear until the closing stretch of this movie. For the first hour or so, Aster successfully builds up a sense of dread, without relying all that much on supernatural chills, at least not obvious ones, to mess with the viewers. Instead, he focuses on family drama and tragedy as viewers are introduced to the doomed Graham family. The opening shot of the film quietly sets the tone as we view the Grahams and their home like a miniature model. Toni Collette's Annie is a miniatures artist, and the visual of giants looming over small settlements pops up frequently. The opening, however, provides this visual for the actual meat and potatoes human beings of the film. They are the miniatures. We don't realise it here because the film's only been going for 45 seconds, but we're watching them through Payman's perspective, ants on a farm, ready to be used at a moment's notice by a bigger, superior life form. Now, when everything kicks off, the Grahams are dealing with the death of Annie's eccentric, mentally ill mother, Ellen. At the funeral, a host of strange characters pop up who the family don't know. They've never seen them before. Now, the sigil of Payman turns up frequently through the film. The actual sigil associated with this apparent king of hell in question is all over the shop. There are hints and clues of something truly bizarre going on in the background from the get-go, that we, the viewers, are really only getting to see half the story. We can tell there's something beyond what the director is showing us. We just can't quite grasp it initially. The family are watched inside their home. Their young daughter Charlie spots strange characters, one watching her at school, another having a bonfire seemingly near the house. And then it turns out that the newly buried Ellen's grave has already been the victim of shenanigans, grave robbers. And finally, real tragedy strikes. Because you see, none of them likes that Ellen all that much, bar the daughter. When you watch the film, sure, they're not pleased she's dead. They're not that upset either, though. And let's be real, if you were Gabriel Byrne's character, and you had a crazy mother-in-law living with you ad nauseum forever, you'd probably be relieved when she keeled over. Not that you can say it, but you would feel it. And finally, so with that in mind, real tragedy, real loss actually does strike. Their son, Peter, who could not look less like his parents if he tried. Alex Wolff was very odd casting in that regard. You're left wondering if he's adopted half the time. Is this a subplot they deleted from the film? Anyway, Peter takes Charlie to a house party. Now you might stop and think, wait, hold on. Why is a 16-year-old taking his 13-year-old sister to a house party? It's an excellent question, because his mum told him to. So stop the clocks and think back to when you were 16. You might go to some house parties in the hopes of two things: getting wasted and getting laid. At least here in the UK that was the case when I was that age. Euphoria has left me assuming it's actually much more extreme in the US, but who knows? I'm sure that show is incredibly realistic and down to earth. Anyways, imagine wanting all that, wanting to have party time, your hormones raging, but having to take your introverted, younger sibling along with you. Your lame sibling, let's be real. For reasons. His mother has chopped him off at the knee. Let's just put it that way. Apparently she's forgotten what it was like to be his age once upon a time. Charlie eats some nuts, she's allergic, Young Peter goes to rush her to the hospital, and in a freak accident, Charlie's head comes clean off during the drive against a telephone pole that, if you land a quick pause, you will see Payman's sigil is on it. The film handles the shock and horror of this tragedy quite impactfully, with a basically catatonic Peter driving on home and leaving his sister's freshly decapitated body for the parents to discover in the morning. The sense of dread here, by the way, is palpable. It may not be some cheap, tacky jump scares or whatever else viewers expect from spook festivals like this normally, but it's a nightmarish moment, capturing that sense of dread and regret that comes with doing something you know can never be undone, that your life before it and your life after will be two very different entities forever. Watching that poor, hopeless stoner boy lie in bed, not really asleep or awake, just in shock, as his mum discovers her daughter's headless corpse, is quite a viewing experience. It's really awful stuff. The epitome of feel-bad cinema. And sometimes you find yourself wondering why exactly this got made, and why many of us will often feel drawn to watch it, why we love seeing such utter torment unfold on our TV screens. Anyways, watching the movie, there is this sense of doom that this freak accident we've just watched, it almost feels planned, synchronized, as if every inconvenient piece of the puzzle was actually by design. Not by the fault of any of the family, but by forces beyond the characters, or us as viewers at this point's comprehension. And this sense of helplessness and hopelessness and being mere pawns in a game of great danger that we cannot understand, from kings we cannot see. It is prevalent throughout the film. That demonic, dare we say, satanic forces from beyond this reality are essentially unbeatable, all-knowing, and all-powerful. It's a recurring theme in more modern, satanic panic horror flicks, with last year's Longlegs being another prime example. Charlie's death eventually pivots into the real plan of the largely mysterious, invisible, figuratively speaking, evildoers in this film, as Payman requires a male vessel to move comfortably in this reality, and good old Ellen, now done and dusted, was lovely enough to offer up her own family for the task. Peter, basically, is in serious, serious trouble as the only young man running around town. Now, at the time of the film's release, critics went absolutely wild for this flick, as far as they do for horror films at least, all lining up to take turns gargling Ari Aster's nuts. General audiences, however, gave it a much more mixed reception. One of the main complaints lay in the film's pace, with it seemingly pivoting quite jerkily from being a grim family drama tragedy kind of deal to surprise, out of nowhere, demonic cult horror flick in the closing stretch. This is quite an unfair assessment. In fact, this couldn't be further from the truth. From first minute to last, this entire film is one big ritual, a spell, if you will, in praise of a supposed king of hell. The twist in the film is that you simply watch it, purely from the victim's unsuspecting perspective until the final scene. In doing so, Aster allows us to get a sneak peek at the sheer helplessness of being a targeted individual, as seemingly every day people are tormented with darkness they are simply not equipped to handle. This is a sacrificial ritual, like something followers of some old Canaanite god might carry out, but done in secret, long-term, all to bring forth an entity that the film ends on the celebration of. Oh no. That reminds me. Spoilers. Bit late for that now, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, this movie's been out for 7 years. If you wanted to watch it, you would have by now. So essentially, we watch the degradation and total destruction of an entire family in service of pleasing one ancient demonic deity, bringing it into this physical reality in order to make the dreams of the perpetrators of this whole thing come true. Pure evil. Shocking. And as just a fictional story, hey, who cares? It's a movie, relax. And in fairness, it is quite a good horror film. It is very high quality. But with every passing year, as veils begin to lift, we see more of this type of behaviour get exposed and bubble to the surface. And to be clear, you don't have to actually believe in any of this more spiritual stuff, the spiritual aspects of it. It can all be complete nonsense. And that's fine. What you have to remember is that there are those out there who think very differently on the matter and believe in it all too strongly. Right, let's see how I can approach this in a tasteful way. Let's go. SRA Let's try and get around the censorship system. So tonic rice a bust. There we go. From the 80s to now, it's always bubbling, always whispered and gossiped about. Obviously, it went on before the 80s. Someone will say that in the comments. I'm just saying the 80s is when the mainstream began to really make a thing out of it. Grinning, referenced, never confirmed, always wondered about, always worried about. The reality of its impact on modern society questioned at every turn. And what most cases have had over the decades, what they've had in common, are a selection of themes. The victimization of youngsters, one of them. Familial cruelty, intergenerational torment. Many of these ideas turn up in Hereditary, with even the title hinting at the all-in-the-family evil of the film's narrative. Annie reveals early on that her brother was pushed to a total nervous breakdown and checked out of life early, let's put it that way, after accusing their mother of trying to put people inside him, and for people with dirty minds, that's not what he meant. It's a hint at the demonic possession we're going to see later on in the film. As in, make his body the vessel for her precious payment, her secret beloved deity that her life quietly revolves around. Her kids just can't seem to realize it. We also know Annie had a very hard time with her mother, who later came, strangely, to oversee the quiet grooming of her own granddaughter, Charlie, prepping her for a demonic possession she was never going to be a good fit for based on her gender. Annie herself, then, to continue this toxic trend of parents and kids locking horns, is constantly at odds with Peter. And from the get-go, we see she's very hateful and antagonistic towards him. He doesn't really do anything in their early scenes together that warranted, and yet the contempt she has for her own son is very plain as day. And it's a dynamic that, unsurprisingly, skyrockets after Charlie's brutal death. And then there's Ellen's friends from the Coven, who are further overseeing the continued destruction of the Graham family, pushing them hard into despair long before their horrendous deaths in the final act take place. Ellen is essentially pimping her own family out to her coven, and the climax of the film, which serves as the ritual for payment, the completion of this ritual to take hold of Peter's body, is rife with abusive overtones, including the whole coven creeping around the Graham house naked. Don't get excited, they did not hire super and fitness models to be the coven, alright? And these people, these nudists, these exhibitionists, expose themselves to a minor. In Peter's case, he's only meant to be 16 or 17 or something. And then Annie is possessed, and she chases and torments Peter further, scaring him beyond belief. And it only gets worse from there. There's more graphic visuals, there's more fear. The Peter character is essentially scared to death until he finally leaps out of a window from the attic of the home. As just a film, it's quite unsettling. All shot and paced to max out the suspense and hand viewers a creepy closing stretch. And then it ends with Payman taking hold of Peter's body, moving in. And it ends then with praise of Payman, as Anne Dowd's Joan character confirms they've completed the true work needed to make manifest their deity of choice in this world. She makes clear that they reject the Trinity, because of course wouldn't be a satanic panic horror flick otherwise. And then they all proudly chant,
Hail Payman! Hail Payman! Hail Payman! Hail!
Quick side note, whenever you see Anne Dowd is in a film, assume there's going to be something very off about her character. Playing creepy old ladies is her jam.
You haven't made flowers on me for maybe 3 weeks. Makes me sad is all.
Now I bring up the Trinity comment because many of these demonic disaster movies seem to act like Christian superstition is the only norm here, like no other religious or spiritual movement has ever butted heads with this kind of terror. While the jinn, as in J-I-N-N, or sometimes D-J-I-N-N, for all you booze hounds out there, we're not talking about G-I-N. While the jinn are not technically considered demons, they are considered spiritual threats, many of whom cause relentless trouble for mere mortals from unseen vantage points, kinda like how a demon stereotypically would. And Prophet Muhammad is listed as having warned his early followers in Islam about them and the dangers they can pose. So keep that in mind next time you find yourself in the deserts of the Middle East, I guess. Obviously there was King Solomon himself, from which many of the so-called magic, with a K, regarding this stuff stems from, He was a Hebrew, goes without saying, quite obvious. And in Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama himself locks horns with the monstrous Asura king Mara, who frequently tries to tempt Gautama from his enlightened path and knock him completely off course. Cheeky demon. That's just a few examples from religious movements that are still very prominent and widely followed today. Throughout history, throughout cultures and civilizations in general, people have been warned against dabbling in the dark arts and this sort of mischief, far from a mere superstition for one institution in particular. Now, in these more secular times we live in, here in the West and many other countries at least, the general vibe is that none of this stuff was ever real, and that our forefathers were merely superstitious fools, severely lacking in any real scientific enlightenment. This was all just silly, largely Christian superstition that the rest of the world probably scoffed at. So now we get richly detailed looks at some of the stuff they allegedly feared, celebrations of it almost, under the guise of so-called entertainment. Basically, all those boogeymen from beyond the three-dimensional are mere works of fiction, for sure, as many assume they are now. Both in, well, actual fiction, as this movie we're discussing has shown, but in the real world as well, where there's apparently no such thing as magic. Does that invalidate millennia of superstition and fear? Maybe. If it did, the question is, though, why is Hollywood so obsessed with drudging it all up and splattering it all over our screens time after time after time? Anyways, let's just try and make this thing coherent again, for now. So, to sum up, the entire movie is in and of itself, whether intentional or not, although I think we all know the answer on that one, a celebratory ritual of, according to the info out there, a supposed king of hell itself. There's more than one. Payman has sometimes been associated with wealth. Ari Aster's net worth no doubt went up when he got to make his first full-length feature here. And funnily enough, demanding praise and worship, including sharing their name with others, is often a key demand of these classic demonic figures in folklore, spreading the word about them so more regular people have them in their heads. Even if it's just a minor, largely subconscious level. Couple of years before Hereditary, a vastly inferior, but more commercially friendly horror movie pulled a similar stunt. The Conjuring 2, the Enfield Poltergeist. I don't know if the whole real-life Enfield case means much to people outside of the UK, but here in the UK it was resoundingly proven to be fraudulent, a fallacy, the kind of thing skeptics point and laugh at, and understandably so. And with all of the obscure cases Ed and Lorraine Warren supposedly worked on in their day, like that one from the first Conjuring movie, for example, director James Wan decided jumping on a proven fake would be a great idea for a horror film where the supernatural is depicted as an all-too-real threat. On the surface, Conjuring 2 isn't nearly as bleak or dark as Hereditary, and it ends on a positive note with the Warrens saving that Enfield family from Marilyn Manson, who in the movie is cosplaying as Sister Mary from the Blues Brothers for some reason. But the proof is in the pudding, as they say. The manner in which Lorraine Warren defeats Sister Manson is pretty anticlimactic. In the first Conjuring, the Warrens together defeat the old witch ghost thing via both a very dramatic exorcism, courtesy of Ed Warren,
Bathsheba! By the power of God, I condemn you back to hell!
And then Lorraine's clairvoyant, telepathic abilities to save the mum being possessed by said witch. Not bad. A suitable solution for these types of movies. Big dramatic climax. Good. This time, Lorraine makes a big song and dance of saying the demon's name, and then...
Your name gives me dominion over you, demon. And I do know your name. You are Valak!
If you go and rewatch the movie a second time, which why the hell would you? It's really not very good. You will notice the demon's name, Valak, pops up here, there, and everywhere. And that Lorraine herself carves the cheeky monster's name directly into a Bible. Valak, according to those old grimoires, is very handy for those who want to go dousing, as in seeking out treasure below ground, divination for the greedy. And if you work high up enough in show business, well, you are indeed rummaging through muck and filth to get to treasure. You know, in a manner of speaking. There are many films guilty of this kind of thing. Hereditary and Conjuring 2 are just two examples of normalizing the supernatural, ushering in occult practices and figures into the mainstream and normalizing it to the masses who want to sit down and watch a little something something for a bit of escapism before they go to bed. Overall, time and again, particularly in the horror genre, we see stories and themes play out that are in line with what Hereditary has to offer. Dysfunctional, tortured souls in grim situations, victims of unseen powers they could never hope to fight back against or be prepared for. Evil powers in mystery worlds governing the miserable lives of humanity and blowing them up at a moment's notice, seemingly on a whim. Look, all of this stuff of old that show business draws inspiration from for stories could be total hogwash, nonsense, lunacy, nothing to take seriously. Okay, sure, yeah, maybe. But the general need to beat viewers over the head with such bleak, demoralizing storytelling is still there, festering in a variety of other ways as well, across any and all genres, and that, regardless of anything else, remains a huge problem in entertainment that needs to be addressed. Whether it's intentional or not, the end result is the same. They are desensitizing audiences to these very morbid, very disturbing, esoteric concepts.